You have a web app that you want to deploy and manage using Docker containers, but you don't want to get hit by Kubernetes complexity day one. Stay tuned, I got something for you. So we're going to talk about Azure App Service or Web App. Azure App Service is one of the oldest services in Azure. I think it dates from 2012, if I remember correctly, maybe even 2011. It's a very mature, very stable platform in Azure. That's been used to deploy many websites. For a couple of years now, it supports containers. So previously, you would deploy a zip file or a special package, but now you can deploy a Docker container in it. And I find it's a very nice intermediate between doing something completely custom and doing Kubernetes, which is this complete orchestrator that allows you to do microservices, to scale out different services at different rate and that type of thing. App Service is much simpler and it does have the benefit of Docker containers. So I do use it quite a bit and I use it for my solution I've been talking about for the last couple of posts. And here it is. So in the core of it, there's an app service plan with 3 web apps, dev, staging, prod. Around it, there's GitHub Action, which I talked about in one of the posts. Then I have Docker Hub, where I deploy my containers. I might replace that with Azure Container Registry at some point. NuGet.org, I use that to deploy other things. And we have front door and the DNS zone in front of it for custom domain. What I found great about Azure App Service is the simplicity compared to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is great if you want to do something complex where you have a complex networking or storage solution. App Service is much simpler. So with Kubernetes, you'll set up your networking, choosing all your pods are going to talk to each other, your storage solution, the security, how do you deal with identity within Kubernetes, that type of thing. Nothing is impossible. It's quite a powerful platform. Use it for years. But for simple projects, I prefer to use Azure App Service. Azure App Service knows that you're a website, so it can make your life simpler by knowing that by specializing in web apps. For instance, it knows about core rules, it knows about certificates, it knows about staging and deployment. It knows about security, so it can provide you with the managed service identity we've seen in a previous video. It can back itself up. It can run on Linux or Windows. It can do A/B testing. So basically, it's quite a well-rounded solution for web apps. And for simple solution, that's my go-to service. So let's look at how my application looks in the portal. So here I have the resource group of my solution. I have front door we explored last time. I have my application app service plan, app services, and Azure Monitor. Let's look at one of those app services on those web apps. So I'm going to look at the dev one. You see the URL here is azurewebsite.net URL, as we've seen last time. This is fronted by Azure Front Door that gives it a nice domain and certificate, but I already have HTTPS enabled here. By default, you cannot opt out of it. I go to Deployment Center, and I select the Setting tab. Then I see the configuration I have for my container. So it is a container type, single container, and a full image name and tag. So I got this, this is the image name, and the tag is dev. As I mentioned in a past post, I'm using the strategy where I just tag the name of the environment and I retrieve the quote latest version for that environment. And that's it. Because of that, I always have the freshest image of my container image. I didn't use deployment slot, mostly because I'm lazy, because really it would have been better. Deployment slot allows you to have a staging slot for the same website. Really what it allows you to do is that when you do a deployment, you don't have this lag where you refresh the web app and it's in limbo because it's restarting. You do that in your staging slot. When you're ready, you just flip the virtual IPs and it's very quick. So you always have a responsive site. But I'm not running a business with that, so I found it wasn't worth the complexity for me. Interesting to look at as well is configuration. And here you'll see all the app settings that I set to my application that are mapped to an environment variable when the application starts. Lots of those are boilerplates, connection to app settings. I won't go through that. What is interesting? Workbench environment. And if I look at that, it's dev. So my application knows in which environment it is. Because when I carry it to staging and prod, it's always the same code. But there's an environment variable that tells it your dev or your staging or your prod. And you'll see what I do with that variable. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. If we look at the sites, again, I won't explain what this application is doing in this video, but if we look at this is the dev, and you see it has this grayish background and it says that it's dev. I like to do that because that tells me this is your dev environment. It's right in my face. The background is different, the title is different, so I won't commit any mistake. Flip side of that is that I won't think it's dev when I'm in prod because prod is different. Staging is blue, and prod is what I want my end users to see. Interesting thing to look at, if you look at the version, this is 0.5.5.1, 0.5.4.77, and 0.5.5.91. So you see that I don't apply what I preach. So I went directly from dev to production. I skipped staging again because I'm lazy. A lot of things in my life can be retraced to the fact that I'm a lazy bastard. But anyhow, so I can see the version over there, and the reason I can do that is because this is the version of the library I'm using. So it's pretty easy for me to extract that from the assembly. That's a .NET concept. Basically, I'm retrieving that from the metadata of the DLLs that I'm using, so I can display that on screen. I find that very useful because you know which version you're dealing with. I always suggest to people to do that. If your application shouldn't display a random number on the page, hide it somewhere, hide it in the source if you want, but always useful to have that. And same thing, I grabbed that trick at some point in my career from wherever places I was working, they were doing that. I found this is a really good idea so that you don't mess about and start playing in prod when you're thinking in dev, etc. Let's look at how this is accomplished. So let's look at the code, the ARM template code that I'm deploying. We've looked at it a little bit in the past post. Here's my website. So here I got my server farm. Server farm is the app service plan. So it's a basic one, basic family, one capacity. No doubt possible. I'm a cheapskate, taking the cheapest thing. It's what kind is it? It's a Linux box, so it has Linux installed on it. Then I have my different website. You'll see I'm doing a copy here. If you're not familiar with that, you can do that in ARM template. You can basically instantiate multiple resources going through a loop. So in this case, I'm looping through the app configs variable. Let's just look at that real quick. So here's my app config, and you can see target. And you can see target environment dev, target environment staging, prod, and I can have different configuration, the container image. So here I'm really using just a plain old custom JSON, and I pass whatever I want. And that allows me not to have 4 arrays. I find it easier to manage that way. Come back here. I'm passing those things around since for instance, target env, and that's just a tag I'm putting. Variables app config with the index copy index. I'm taking wherever I am in this loop dot target env. So I'm getting and fetch that variable. But what I wanted to show you is the configuration, the app setting configuration. And the most important one is this one, workbench environment. So I pass the environment away. This is how my application knows which environment it's in. And that's how the same code, the same container behaves differently depending on where it is. So there are multiple ways to do that. I could have reacted to the URL or what have you, but I decided to go this way. I just realized that those are not the vanity URLs, that I'm talking directly to my website. That's a good segue. So I didn't block my website. You can access it directly if you want to. Why? Because I don't care if you don't pass by front door, but if I would care, if I put, for instance, a web application firewall on Azure front door, I wouldn't want you to bypass it by going directly to the website. And there's a way to do that. You just basically lock the traffic so that only Azure front door can communicate with you and your specific Azure front door. All right, so that was Azure App Service. I hope you find this session useful and you learn something. My general tip to you, if you're starting with containers and you're starting with containers in Azure and you don't have requirements about microservices, so when I talk about microservices, that you have mini services that will scale independently. If you don't have any complicated networking configuration you want to do, consider Azure Web App. It will simplify your life and you can still use containers. So you can build the muscles to use container to build and deploy those containers. And if you want to migrate to Azure Kubernetes services later on, you can still do it. Call to action as usual. Go to the my GitHub site, look at the ARM template. You can try it out. You can try to deploy it on your site. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.